All right, we've got Matej Sis here from VTScoop here to talk about Miami transfer Lynn Kidd, a center, 6'10", a guy that was one of the most improved players in the ACC last year. Finished third in the voting with Ian Schifflin. They're out of Clemson and Hunter Salas ahead of him. But Jim Larinaga said to him, Lynn was the most improved. So let's talk about his season, Matej, and what you saw out of him. 13.2 points per game, 6.5 rebounds for the season. Numbers dip a little bit in ACC competition. We'll touch on that. But just, what do you attribute the improvement to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Lynn Kidd has always been a very talented player. I think it's taken him some time to really get into his own, especially a guy that's 6'10". You can tell he's kind of a leaner frame. It took him some time in the weight room. And then, you had guys on Virginia Tech like Justin Mutz, Grant Basile last year that kind of ate up most of the front court minutes. I think this was a perfect storm for Lynn Kidd to really command that five position for Virginia Tech the way that their offense plays. I think he really benefited from it. And as you said, I don't think he was expected to be a main scoring contributor earlier in their year, but was really able to dominate in, out of conference play. And I think, really showed tremendous strides as a scorer around the rim early in the season.
Yeah, looking at the stats and the game logs, he obviously jumped out to a really good start. Those first 6 games, double figures, had a 24-point game in there. Was there something that you felt like leading into the season where it felt like that this was coming? Was there something with his development or maybe signs the year before, or just the way they talked about in the offseason, in addition to the minute? That's always a big thing in college basketball, the opportunity in minutes and role. But were there things essentially leading up to this in addition to the talent, as you mentioned?
Absolutely. I think when you date back to the offseason, we noticed that Virginia Tech really wasn't targeting any guys out of the transfer portal. Really high praise from Mike Young for Lynn Kidd. And we knew that he was going to be a starter. We knew that he was going to play big minutes. And I think early in the season, being able to be in an offense where, he's controlling the paint, he has guys on the wing that are moving. He's a very athletic player. And I think it just all kind of clicked for him. I think, I mentioned he was in the weight room. He looked a lot different this season than he did last season, a lot stronger in the upper body. And I think all those things kind of came together, and he was really able to put his athleticism and his skill to the test.
We're going to break down his defense and kind of his all-around game, but offensively, let's stay offensively. The shooting percent was one of the tops in the country, 67. Just a highly efficient guy. And one of the things, I know we're looking at field goal percent. That's certainly impressive, but the 84% from a center, a big guy that can knock down free throws, to me is huge. But offensively, what do you see with him? Where his game kind of took to the next level to be a double-digit scorer and have those big games.
Absolutely. I think what he realized this year is that he's not the biggest of centermen. He's not the biggest five, but he's able to use that athleticism in a high-paced offense where he's able to move around the floor. He's able to counter, slip, and really, thrives in pick and roll situations, but you're going to see most of his baskets around the rim. He's not taking mid-range jumpers. He's definitely not taking any threes. He hasn't his entire career. And to your point, I think he's just very efficient around the rim. He knows what his game is. He's not trying to back down guys and beat them with his physicality. He's really moving around the block, finding ways to get open. And I think that athleticism really helps him. Most of his highlights, if you look him up, are really just dunks. Like, he is a guy that is finding that space behind the defense and scoring around the rim. And to your point, another big aspect of his development, he was mainly a 60% free throw shooter throughout his career in limited minutes. This year, he's been really effective from the free throw line. And I think that really helps him a lot too.
There's a couple of things that stand out to me. You touch on you mentioned athleticism, and I remember watching him at the high school level and kind of going back to that. Miami was a school that pursued him at the high school level. He reclassified, goes to Clemson there for a year, and it just didn't work out. So it's always interesting with these transfer portal situations, of kind of revisiting former prospects, and it happens a lot because basketball, it's way different than football, where you offer seemingly over 200 prospects in a recruiting class. Basketball, it's not about ranking; it's about fit so many times, and they really identify guys of this is who we like for different reasons. It doesn't necessarily mean they're better than another player. It just means that's a better fit, or players that certain schools like, and it's fascinating. So it doesn't surprise me at all to see Miami or any school kind of revisit players and prospects that they had in the recruiting process. But certainly remember him and that process there. You know, again the athleticism. You watch his highlights, you watch his games. He's getting up the floor. He's running the floor. I really like when players play their strengths in that sense. So I want you to touch on some transition things that you see there, and then also, I think it's athleticism too. He does, kind of seen him spin out of the low block, and kind of finish there. It's not just, catch lobs and dunk. I think he does have some footwork things that certainly looks to be excellent score. And I like when guys know who they are. When you touched on the 3-point shooting, that's great. He's not expanding it. I'm sure it's very intriguing to want to do that. We're seeing it. We saw it with Miami and their big man and Omier wanting to stretch out a little bit more and shoot some threes, and he did so at a good rate. But is running the floor and maybe some strength, the way you could talk about him using his athleticism to his advantage as an offensive player.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, specifically on the defensive end, he's not the biggest shot blocker guy that's going to poke his hands in there. I think he's really good at staying out of foul trouble. He is a big body, a lot of defensive rebounds. That's kind of his game there, kind of cleaning things up on the defensive end. But he's not afraid to make that first pass to the point guard and then sprint up the floor. As you said, that's his game. He's faster than most big men. He's leaner than most big men. And there are times where simply if he has the avenue to go down the court, he's going to take it himself. And I think that's a very valuable thing to have in a big man that, feels confident in his ability to handle the ball. So yes, he loves to get up the floor. He loves being in a high pace sort of system. And I think that benefits him. And, one more point I wanted to make is when he first came to Virginia Tech, he was around 245 pounds. And I think there was kind of a spot in his career where, he was deciding, should I be that big guy that, in order to stay in the ACC, I really have to add weight to my frame. And then over time, he kind of lost that weight again, became that, 235. I'm going to build into this frame and add muscle. So he's really identified what his game is. And I think it's, he's grown leaps and bounds in being comfortable in what he brings to the table.
What do you think he brings to the table defensively? 6.5 rebounds last year. It's top 20 in the ACC. It's not a huge number. It dips a little bit, 5.6 in ACC play. Not a huge shot blocker. The 1.28, the defensive BPR rating, according to Evan Maya there. But just what do you make of him defensively?
Yeah, I think he's solid. I think he still has room to grow on the defensive end. I think where you see his strength, again, his athleticism, when he's in those pick and roll situations, I think he does a really good job of switching. I think he can guard guys that are agile in the paint. He's not swatting a ton of shots. He's not a big shot blocker, but I think he's a good on-ball defender. I think where he needs to improve is really in that physicality. I know I mentioned it's not really his game, but securing more and more defensive rebounds and preventing those second chance opportunities. There were times this year where you wanted to get more out of him, but I think overall he's grown there a lot as well.
I'm kind of just summarizing everything that he's done so far, or particularly last year. What kind of impact do you think he'll make? Because we're seeing a little bit of a change in the ACC. With Baycott moving on, obviously we think Filipowski is going to do the same. Quentin Post, some big guys moving on from the ACC, and you look around and you see a guy like Lynn Kidd. Is he going to be kind of that upper echelon, one of the top centers in the ACC? It just looks like the way it's kind of slotting around the rest of the conference, and certainly transfers can come in. There'll be some talented guys there, but just what kind of impact do you think he'll make next season?
Yeah, I think he's a super stable player. And I think that's really important when you look at, you mentioned a lot of the attrition around the league. And I think, for a team like Miami that typically has really good guard play, that has, good spaced out offense, I think he's going to make a really good impact there. And I think he can be extremely solid at Miami. I think, I would put him as a top 10 player right now in the ACC, just the way that things stand. And I think he certainly can grow a lot more. I think we didn't see the best performances out of him in ACC play, and I'd like to see that improve. But I certainly think the way that his trajectory is going, that he can be one of those top guys in the ACC.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting, just going to see how the roster shake out. You touched on the guard play. Obviously, he played with good guards at Virginia Tech there, and I think that'll obviously Miami wants to have good guards, and we'll see kind of how the roster shakes out. They're still working on piecing everything together. They grabbed Brandon Johnson out of East Carolina. They're waiting on word on four of their other top guys if they're going to come back or if they're going to move on. So they're still trying to piece it together, but certainly, Jim Larinaga touched on wanting to add more size, and I just think back on it was a point of emphasis this offseason, but just kind of how the season went on, and certainly playing against those top guys, as I mentioned. But I think of even an Efton Reed at Wake Forest, the way Larinaga would just talk about him and his impact, and certainly Efton wasn't their best player, but just what a good center, a quality big man can do, and kind of help piece everything else together. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how things piece together and how Lynn improves and kind of fits into this Miami roster. But Matej, I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. It's always great insight when guys like yourself can be able to provide a lot of knowledge. So thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.